Hey stranger. This is story number 87. In high school, I got a job at a gas station. It was sort of out near the edge of our touristy, ski-centric town, and it had a small grocery store attached. It was nowhere you'd go to do actual grocery shopping. It was more a place to sell crazy high marked up saltine crackers and milk to visitors who'd forgotten them when picking up stuff in town proper, or when someone needed something past 9 p.m. It was the winter of my junior year, meaning I was 16. Though there are laws about leaving a minor alone in charge of a store by themselves, it happened all the time. Not that I was concerned. No supervision meant that when I wasn't helping a customer, I was usually reading something for school or playing on my phone. Besides, my shift always ended by 7 p.m. at the latest. I was never there at night, only during the day, and that made it feel like nothing truly bad could ever happen. The crazies always come out after dark, right? It was a Saturday. I was reading one of the magazines we sold. The door chime went off. I was right at the middle of a sentence, so I didn't look up right away. But when the lady said something like, "Excuse me," I finished reading the sentence, then looked up. I expected that the person would be approaching me, making eye contact, waiting for my response. Instead, I saw a lady walking around in the store, not looking in my direction at all. She was very well dressed, full-length dress, nice pea coat with a fur lining, and the glitter of jewelry at her ears and neck. Again, it was a very touristy town. The big draw was outdoorsy stuff like hikes and skiing, but it still had lots of fancy, bougie restaurants, boutiques, and the like for the moneyed folks to spend their cash. She didn't stand out at first, is what I'm getting at. I had glanced up to see if she'd parked for gas. She hadn't. Then shot her a small smile and went back to reading. She walked up and down the shelves, going from the aisle closest to the door all the way to the glass cases in the back. The sun was at such an angle that the light was streaming off to the right of me in a big blocky patch of sunlight. It wasn't directly in my face, but I could sense it when people walked in front of it, blocking it for a moment. Same deal with the lady. I didn't look up when she walked down that aisle, but I could tell she had all the same because the sunlight was temporarily blocked as she walked through it. I turned a page. A few moments later, the sunlight was blocked again. I registered this, but assumed she had doubled back to look at something. Then, the third time it happened, the light stayed blocked. I finally looked up at her. First, at her shoes. It was snowy out. I thought maybe she was stalling in the store to warm up from being ill-dressed for the weather. How often do you look at a person's shoes? She was wearing brown men's work boots. Didn't exactly go with the dress and pea coat, but then again, maybe they were her husband's and she was borrowing them. My next glance was at her hands, probably at the thought of husband, thinking seeing the ring on her finger would confirm this, and I could go back to my magazine. but she wasn't wearing a ring. She didn't have anything on her hands or in her hands, and that was strange too. At this point, she'd spent nearly 10 minutes in my store. I realized at this point that I was looking at her, maybe staring at her, and glanced up to her face. Crap. She had noticed and was staring at me. I felt caught and immediately shot her a smile, trying to smooth it over with a, "Hey, are you finding everything you need?" Her mouth split into a wide smile back. I felt relief. She told me that she was glad to have found such a neat little store, then asked where the Band-Aids were. I told her the aisle. It was back near the glass drink coolers, and while she turned and walked back to them, I thought about going back to my magazine. But I didn't. She was older, and the older tourists we got seemed to take it personally when customer service workers were distracted from giving them full attention. Since she'd caught me staring at her, I didn't want to give her a reason to get mean about it. She reached the aisle and hemmed and hawed a bit about the Band-Aids. Then, sure enough, she asked me to help her decide by saying, "Well, come over and tell me which ones you'd pick." I assumed this was a gambit at conversation, but lady, come on. They're Band-Aids. I don't think we even had a generic brand on the shelf, just the one brand, so it was size of wound based only. I said as much. She finally selected a box, then continued her path through the store, slowly. Now that I was paying full attention, or had to pretend to be, I couldn't go back to reading the magazine. I instead started looking down at the counter, thinking about swiping a bleach wipe over its surface, just filling time until the lady left. The sunlight to my right was blocked again. I looked up, and again, there she was, standing stock still in the aisle, staring right at me. I jumped a bit. She waited until I did, then began asking me about aspirin. Now I was really confused. Aspirin was in the same area as the Band-Aids. Surely she must have seen it. To be honest, something about all this was beginning to set me on edge. Why did she keep walking to that one place in the store where the sunlight would be blocked, staring at me until I looked up? Once was a chance. Twice was weird. And literally, the aspirin was on the same shelf as the bandages. She had to have seen it. She again thanked me with that wide, unsettling grin, then walked back to the far corner of the store and perused the aisle. And again, she asked for my opinion, again asking me to come over and show her which one I would pick. Unlike the bandages, I knew we had a few different pill bottles, so I couldn't just toss out a "there's only one kind" at her this time. Maybe she has a hard time seeing up close, I thought. So I came from around the counter and started walking to the far corner. She was grinning so hard at me, almost triumphantly. I remember thinking she'd wanted just this, me inconvenienced, or maybe, more importantly, serving her actively. I came around the corner of the aisle, and as I approached her, something struck me as odd. From a distance, She looked like every other upper middle class tourist, but up close, she smelled like cigarettes and unwashed hair. It surprised me. It wasn't like a terrible stench, but just not what I'd expected. Like the men's boots. Well, whatever. From this vantage point, I could see the back corner of the store fully. The glass cases ended to give space to the back door. The glass cases ended to give space to the back door, which led to a small storeroom, an employee break area, which I never used as it would have required more than one person on shift, and a bathroom. The door was usually propped open for customers who wanted to use the restroom, or for one of us employees who needed to drag a case of drinks or whatever from the back to restock mid-shift. But now, it was closed. Wait, did I see a slice of space between the door and the jam? No, it seemed closed now. I sensed the lady staring at me hard, so I let my eyes meet hers again, came alongside her, and got busy helping like I'm paid to do. I didn't get any physical feeling I can remember. I read a lot of these stories, and people are always talking about chills and dizzy, rushy feelings in their brains. Not me. I felt like I was floating. My brain wasn't connecting all the things I saw or smelled. But as I straightened up to glance at the shelf and help the customer, my brain was slowly bringing things forward, like a kid who's got something they're not supposed to have, shamefully bringing their hands from behind their backs. As I thought about it, I shifted, taking a big, showy step to her left, putting her between me and the door in a pretense to look beyond the small selection of aspirin, as if I was seeking out a prized brand hidden behind the cough drops. I motioned her to lean in and look with me. If I had any inclination that something was wrong, any gut feeling to reference, it was a concern that there was no concern. Mostly, my brain was lazily doggy paddling me back to something that seemed to stick out, be out of place. It was the sunlight. Rather, it was the blocked sunlight, happening twice before she stood in it, staring at me. Was that because she had doubled back? Or was it? Was it someone else in the store who'd come in with her? As she leaned in closer, I realized that the smell of cigarettes and BO was thick in this part of the store, but it wasn't coming from her, meaning it had to be coming from somewhere else. Someone else. The door. I made a big show of looking down, noticing my laces, which I never tied. I just slid them on and my boots over them, and then remarked, "Oh, silly me," as I kneeled down to tie my shoes and thus sneak a look behind me to the door. It was closed, mostly. As I looked, I saw it shift slightly, like someone was holding it closed almost all the way. Bet $10 that someone was the source of the cigarette smell. Despite my mounting suspicions, I still wasn't getting any sort of "oh my god" feeling, even as I saw things like the door or confirmed that the rank odor wasn't coming from the only other person I'd seen in the store, and thus was coming from someone else. I felt slow and dumb, but I was not struck so dumb that I couldn't think of a way to pull both myself and the lady away from the back door. The lady had angled while I tied my shoe, taking a step to my left and again putting herself between me and the rest of the store, so I was again closest to the back door. In response, I got up, telling her I thought the brand of pills I preferred were behind the counter, and I motioned to her to follow as I returned to the cashier's stand. There was a bottle of Excedrin in my backpack, so it was easy enough to place it on the counter to draw her away from the back door. The lady did follow me from the back corner, and as I handed her the bottle, saying something like, "These are the ones I like best," I was already palming out my cell phone, wondering how to get a hold of the non-emergency line. The lady huffed a bit, looking at me kind of hard, her eyes all puckered and wrinkled, before she sighed and muttered something I didn't catch. I asked her, "Excuse me, ma'am?" She replied, "I said, well, I don't believe I should have to intervene here. I don't much care for that co-worker of yours." Stupidly, I repeated, "That co-worker of mine?" She nodded emphatically. "Near running over a paying customer and rushing to the back to what I assume, well, let's not assume what I believe they're up to back there all this time." She tossed her head, continued speaking. Her voice was getting sharp, wanting to lecture even as she paused to select her words. She then brought up, "That smell! Surely by bringing you within range, you could have at least noticed it. When I was your age, we didn't stand around waiting for someone to tell us to have a little motivation and address an obvious problem." Lady, you have no idea. Forget non-emergency line. Forget not having a single spike of adrenaline or sense of danger. 911 it was. I motioned the lady towards me, leaning down so her teased and sprayed hair did a better job of blocking the sight line between me and the back corner of the store. I brought my cell phone to my ear. She started to speak again, looking increasingly peeved, but I spoke in a low tone over her, as though I didn't have a phone to my ear and was speaking with her. I spoke to the operator, first responding to the question of location, and then telling them, "Someone's hiding in the back room of my store. I think maybe planning to rob us." The customer's eyes widened, stretching all of the wrinkles out of the skin around her eyes until the skin around her eyes looked almost youthfully smooth. Her mouth fell open a bit, making a small O. I locked my eyes on her, kept talking to the operator as the man on the other end confirmed he was sending the police to our location, asking all sorts of questions I had no way of answering. Instead, I repeated them aloud to get the customer lady to offer up details. No luck. All the terror I should have been feeling seemed to have been sucked up by her. She wasn't saying much back, but the occasional gasped breath and, "Oh my." Of all the times to clam up, I thought. I waited on the line, the operator continuing to update me on the police's location. I heard a car engine outside, but no siren or lights splashing across the windows. The lady turned quick, her hand coming up to her throat, moaning loudly. The door chimed, and 2 uniformed police came in. Again, like she was stealing all the energy in the room, her breath came out in a dramatic whoosh. She began to speak, to lecture, but I spoke over her, firmly offering a polite greeting in a voice a little too loud to pass as normal. They looked at me, and I pointed to the back corner, then watched them as they moved smoothly through the store to the back door. They stopped at the door, pausing, maybe seeing what I had. Then the door was shoved in, and the still air suddenly rioted with sound. A muffled yelp from the back, the barked orders of the police, and a bunch of weird groany and screechy screams from the lady customer. She was backed up against my counter, plastered against it, and I finally felt something. Irritation. Something big was happening, and her helmet of hair and theatrics were blocking my view. Another police car, this one with lights spinning a blur of color over the canned goods, pulled up outside. The first 2 cops emerged from the back, dragging a man between them as the second pair of police entered the store and darted right to them. I was able to get one clear shot of the man. Dark brown hair shot through with white that glinted like tinsel in the overhead lights, a reddish beard, and a muted green puffer jacket, before the lady customer, not to be outdone as the most important thing in the room, dramatically collapsed to the ground in a heap. I felt the same strange numbness as the police questioned me. I answered what I could. I showed the police where the interior camera feeds went and passed them the owner's number for his permission to hand over the security tapes. He ended up rushing down to the store to check on me. He was a nice man that way, understaffing notwithstanding, and he even gave me the next day off. As I was leaving, I overheard him talking with the police. They were saying something about shock, probably the lady customer making a scene. I didn't stick around to hear about it. If I felt anything now, it was just being bone tired. For anyone concerned or wondering if I had lapsed into a fugue as an explanation for the lack of feeling I had, first, thanks for caring. Second, not to worry. The day after my impromptu time off, I was back at work. The owner had scheduled 2 people that shift, and that gave me the opportunity to ask about what had happened after I left. There wasn't much detail. The man was known to the police, whatever that means. I guess he'd had run-ins with them before in an official capacity. He hadn't had much to say, but the charges included the words theft, premeditated, and assault. The theft was kind of funny. What I had taken for a beard in my glance at the man was actually food smeared on his face, as he'd helped himself to some of the food in the back, specifically tinned beef stew. But assault? I asked my coworker about that, confused. He'd slunk in and raced to the back of the store, stolen some overpriced canned goods, but that was it. He hadn't so much as laid a finger on anyone. The coworker told me, I guess they found our box cutter on him, like he was holding it when they pushed the door in and knocked him over. And finally, I felt something. As the realization of what that guy had been planning, preparing, amping himself up to do back there, that when I caught the door sliding shut behind me, he'd had it popped open, one eye peering through, the store's box cutter clenched in his hand, as he scoped my back for a good place to plunge it in. I felt the floor. I fainted dead away. What strikes me about a lot of these stories is how mundane they are. I mean, how many little gas stations do we stop at on a road trip? Do you ever wonder what's back in their stockroom? Maybe it's just because so much of it's on TV, and it's dramatized with pregnant pauses and not very subtle spikes in the music. But it occurs to me that as I think back over the things I've seen in life, they just seem to happen out of nowhere. No big drama. No stranger in a fedora and trench coat lurking in the shadows. Something as mundane and typical as a gas station shopette on a Thursday afternoon. Well, anyway, if you liked the story, please utilize the corresponding button. If you want to hear more of these, be sure to subscribe. If you crave a deeper means of expression, please feel free to do so in the comments. And otherwise, I'll see you next time. Take care out there, stranger.